Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where we chat with startup founders just like you from all over the globe. Each episode, we bring you practical and actionable tips to help you escape the cubicle and begin your own startup journey. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
Here's a quick word from our sponsor, Podbrand Media.
As a business owner, new sales leads are essential. At Podbrand Media, we create a branded podcast for you to generate those leads by interviewing your best potential clients as subject matter experts. Not only creating great rapport, but also great content to share in your industry. Affordable and effective. Contact us today at podbrandmedia.com to learn more.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Yong-Soo Chung. Young, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin. I'm really excited to be here.
So it's really interesting. So every guest has kind of a different way that they want to kind of prep for the podcast, and they sometimes they'll ask questions, sometimes they'll say, no, let's get rolling, let's just jump in and just go for it. But I really appreciated the fact that Young took just a moment before we started and really wanted to know who the listeners were so he could speak directly to you. So I am really, really anxious to start firing those questions away. But before we get started, could you please just, if you and I met at a networking event, how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2009, and obviously great time to graduate with the Great Recession. I actually started off in finance, and I chose finance because at that time, it's finance or consulting. You either go to investment banking or consulting. And when I graduated, I wanted to kind of like have a side hustle because I felt like, I don't know, it just felt like something that I wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to start a company, but I didn't know like where I was gonna go with that. So I started off as a writer for a personal finance blog, and I was getting paid $25 for every article. And it took me 2 hours.
You were just writing for another blog.
Exactly. I was writing for another blog, and it took me 2 hours to write an article, minimum of 2 hours. And so that's like less than minimum wage, probably.
That's McDonald's wages.
Exactly, right? So that's kind of where I started, and then did a few other things here and there, and then ultimately wanted to get out of New York City because I wanted to get into the startup scene. And so the community was not there in New York City. So I decided to go to San Francisco, one-way ticket to San Francisco, and I actually slept on the floor of my friend's small apartment in Berkeley for 3 months. And I was living off of one suitcase. I didn't have a place. Basically, I didn't have a place to live, didn't have a job. And 3 months, my back was hurting. It was just a very, very rough time. And I was finally able to get a job in a mobile gaming startup. And from then on, it's just kind of, I wanted to start my own company one day. And that's why I moved to San Francisco to get into tech and eventually start a company. But I needed to find a job first and then network my way into that kind of environment. So I was there for 2.5 years. And then actually the company was downsizing. And so I was part of that layoffs. And so I found myself without a job again. And then at that point, I kind of revisited the reason why I moved to San Francisco, which was to eventually start a company. And I was hoping to meet an engineer who I could, get along with and start a company. But I was in business development for that startup. And I don't know if you know, but engineers and business development people, they tend to like not get along as well.
They're often at odds. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I decided to take a slightly different path, which is learn engineering myself. And so I actually went to a coding boot camp, 13 weeks, 8 a.m. till 9 p.m., Monday through Saturday. And It was really intense. And I actually learned it's brutal. But I actually learned more during those 13 weeks than probably my entire college 4 years.
So what coding camp was it? I'm curious.
It's called Hack Reactor. And it was in San Francisco. I think they got acquired, so it's something else now. But at the time, it was really them and one other coding bootcamp that was kind of the go-tos. And Yeah, I went with them. I actually didn't even get in the first try. So this is something that I don't actually talk about very often, but I applied and they denied me, but I was really persistent and I was resilient. I essentially just like told the staff, I was like, I need to get in. How do I get in? And then
Yeah.
they gave me some assignments and I did those assignments and then they finally accepted me through my persistence. um, so, so yeah, after that coding bootcamp, I got a job at a company in the blockchain space. So blockchain startup, which is
Yeah.
very exciting. This
And
is
what year was that?
2014.
Okay,
2014.
2014. So it's
Yeah.
pretty early days.
It's very early days. Yeah. This is before Ethereum. And actually, Vitalik was, I actually met him and saw him in the office once because he was visiting. And Vitalik actually used to work for this company. Little known fact, but anyways, so did that for a year and a half, and then all the regulation stuff started happening right around September of 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to leave because I'm someone that always wants to keep things moving. And I just didn't feel like it didn't feel right that I literally can't do anything at work. Like one time we went to go watch a movie on a Friday, like our team together during the workday, we left and go watch the Pixar movie. And like that was all fun. It felt like a field trip. Um, but I don't know, for me, it just wasn't something that I could wait on. Like it was just so uncertain in terms of like, okay, what's going to happen now with regulation, all that stuff. And I mean, we're still not clear with regulations today. So, but anyway, so after that time, I left and then launched Urban EDC. And so Urban EDC, Everyday Carry, is what it stands for. And so it's stuff like carry on a daily basis. So wallets, watches, pens, pocket knife, flashlights, this sorts of stuff.
Still have that running today?
Yep, it's still running. Got teams of about 5 people, and I've essentially delegated most of the tasks and also decision making to my team. And so, what's really nice is that they are now carrying out the vision for the company on their own, and so that allowed me to kind of take a step back and work on other stuff. And
Did you do this through like drop shipping or Amazon FBA or?
Nope.
So just all source it on your own?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting story too. So to validate the shop, I actually bought stuff off of Amazon and resold them at the same price. So obviously didn't make any money, but it was a valuable, I guess, testing to see if this concept would resonate with the community. And so what I did was I went to Instagram, which is where the audience for Everyday Carry Gear, they were hanging out, and I was able to get build an audience of about 10,000 followers. And at that point, I also had a email sign up link in the bio, and so people will click on it, sign up for their email, whatever. And then ultimately, around 10K followers, I decided to test this shop with some stuff I purchased off of Amazon, and just to validate, right? Because there's no shop at this time dedicated to Everyday Carry Gear. There's a lot now, but at that time there wasn't any. And so I needed to validate whether or not people would actually, want this kind of stuff. So
seems easy to build a community around. I mean, just the concept alone is a pretty unique niche, concept that is kind of edgy. It's like,
yeah, I mean, I would say so. I mean, it's a lot of people are really proud of what they carry because it represents, it's almost like jewelry, but for men.
Yep.
So people carry like a special coin that they, I don't know, acquired somehow, or they'll carry a knife that their grandfather gave them. And it kind of gives them a sense of, I don't know, like pride, and also just almost like identity. And so that's kind of where it starts to get really interesting, is not just, I'm carrying a pen because I need to write stuff down. It's more like, I carry this specific pen because of this story that, that I have with that pen, right? So it's
so did you
almost
build that
like
through the product side or through the story side? So, you say your Instagram followers, is this pretty much like the community was being built by people just posting what they carried and just some explanation from that, or was it really more product based when you were building the Instagram account?
What's really interesting is that the community itself is very product driven. So they love seeing cool gear. They love seeing, very unique things that they've never seen.
Right.
And so I went from community first, but the community, what they wanted was to see products. So it was a really nice tie-in. Where compared to like a lot of lifestyle brands, you can't sell the product, you have to sell like a certain way of living. But it wasn't like that here. It was just more like, here's the product, like, these are really cool, like cool stuff. You can buy them at whatever. So
yeah. And so was it more affiliate like purchases, or were you actually buying and reselling in the site itself?
Yeah, buying and reselling on the side. So yeah, so there's a lot of inventory risk there as well.
Yeah.
And that's why like we started off as a retailer. So basically we would reach out to other brands and say, hey, we just launched our shop. Do you have a whole line sheet? And so we started with that. And then for several years we were rolling with that for a while. And then maybe 2-3 years ago, we started making our own knives, and those started doing really well.
Yeah.
And so we're doubling down on that. And yeah, it's been kind of a fun journey.
So I'm curious about just the knives you hear so much about. I went through TSA and I lost my favorite knife, type thing. So is that you seen that kind of thread through the Instagram account as well?
Yeah, people do lose stuff up going through the security. I actually have a good friend. He travels everywhere, and he's bought a lot of stuff from the shop, and every time he comes visit, he always shows like, look at all the stuff I got through security. And he would always show me, and I'm like, wow, how did you get through security with that? And so he does, obviously he does have his fair share of confiscations, but yeah, he just likes to show me like all the stuff that he's been able to carry. Yeah.
So it's, you've done exactly what like every entrepreneur probably dreams of. You kind of started from scratch. It sounded like you probably bootstrapped this, and then you grew it, and then now you can kind of like the old E-Myth adage that says, stop working in your business and start working on it. And you've delegated out, and you've put people in charge that, are responsible and gifted and, can kind of carry the weight for you. But that's led you to something else. What are you involved in now?
Yeah. So in 2017, we brought home a French Bulldog. His Instagram account actually blew up. A few of his videos went viral. And so actually there's one video where I'm kind of like cradling him, but the video cuts off like around my neck. And so like my torso is like basically been viewed 1 million times by random strangers on the internet. And so yeah, that video was the one that really went viral for him. And so a year later, my wife and I, we launched a dog boutique shop called Spotted by Humphrey. And so we utilize kind of the back-end operations for our e-commerce business for Urban ADC to power the back-end operations for Spotted by Humphrey. And so similar model. And then a couple of years later, we had a lot of people asking us for fulfillment help, because fulfillment is typically a very big pain point for e-commerce store owners. And so we actually had paying clients before we had a website and before we even had a name for the company. And so that was like really good validation for us. So we decided to go all in. And so that's when Growthjet was born. So Growthjet is a third-party logistics company, and we're also climate neutral certified. So we want to make sure that, all the carbon footprint is offset for 2020, 2021, 2022. And so, yeah, so that one, we just moved into a 39,000 square foot warehouse, and we're ramping up. So essentially we provide fulfillment services for emerging e-commerce brands that are growing very quickly, mostly direct to consumer. And yeah, that's been going really well. And
wow.
Yeah, now gutsy. It's kind of yeah, it is, right?
And you're taking on Amazon FBA almost head to head. It sounds like.
Yeah, you know what's so funny, Kevin? I was at so when we first launched Growthjet, we launched it out of a second floor dance studio, if you can believe it. And it was terrible. Never start a fulfillment operations on a second floor because
With no
the
elevator.
elevator situation. Yeah, it's just terrible. But anyway, so
Rent's
we
cheap.
did that, and we actually got noticed. So it was actually this one big warehouse with a lot of smaller businesses operating in it, and we received notice 1 month prior to leaving that warehouse that Amazon was taking over the entire warehouse. And so literally we got pushed out by Amazon. It's essentially Amazon FBA. And we had to quickly find a new warehouse, in South San Francisco. And this was during the lockdown. So everything was a lot harder. We didn't know if we were even allowed to go outside. And a lot of us, this is March 2020, just to get time frame for everybody. And so that was really tough. But yeah, we got through. We actually locked up a really good lease because everyone was freaking out and all the lease prices were all crashing down.
Yep.
So we took advantage of that. And yeah, so we moved out of that space recently into a bigger space, 39,000 square foot space. And yeah, we're now kind of rolling along. Now I am starting a podcast called First Class Founders. And this podcast is essentially a culmination of everything that I've learned. And I'm trying to be more public about what I'm doing. And it's just kind of like, this is kind of, what I wish I'd known before I started this entire journey.
Yeah.
If someone would just sit down and talk to me, like I'm just talking to this mic, like, I'm telling all my stories. And so that's what the podcast is about now. And so that's kind of a newest, initiative that I'm doing.
And I wish you well in that endeavor, but we're going to get a little sneak peek today because we're going to get, as we close the podcast out today, we're going to dig into your psyche a little bit and pick those mentor moments that are just the nuggets of gold for listeners. But before we do that, I've got a quick question about kind of nature versus nurture. I mean, it seems like to me, you from a pretty young age, you had in your mind, I'm going to start something. I'm going to, I have the entrepreneur gene, so to speak, the DNA. So do you think that you've had extensive, I guess, history in Silicon Valley and seen, probably thousands of people in this space. What do you think or what do you think about the idea of kind of an entrepreneur gene?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. I think that there is something that would make someone a better entrepreneur versus not a mediocre entrepreneur. And I think that is like patience, discipline, hard work, ethics, like this kind of stuff. I think I'm sure it can also be learned, but if it comes to you more naturally, then it's easier for you. It's, the analogy that I like to use is like, LeBron James, right? Like, obviously he's one of the best basketball players ever, right? I could have been, playing basketball when I was a little kid and like just been able to, maybe I could have gotten to a certain level, maybe college, but I would probably never be able to achieve what he's achieved. I'm pretty certain that I could say that, right? With pretty good confidence. And so that's like, I could be determined and work, I don't know, like 20 hours to all this, practice and skills and all that stuff, but I won't ever achieve that level. And so I think that everyone has the ability to get to a certain level. And the great thing about entrepreneurship is that it's not a game like for example, I can't go out and play amateur basketball and get paid for it. Like, it's not that in demand, right? You have to be at a professional level to get paid well. Whereas entrepreneurship, you can be like, a side hustle. You can make a few, $100, a couple $1,000 here and there, and that might be okay with you, right? So the game of entrepreneurship is great in that it's not this like skewed game where the best entrepreneur, I mean, I'm sure like there's like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, but I mean, but like it's not as skewed as something like a professional basketball, right? Where I can't just go out and play basketball and make like a couple $1,000s a month, right?
Right.
And so that's what I really like about entrepreneurship.
That is a really good analogy, I think. So but I do think that, you know, you said it can be learned. I think one thing that can't be learned as much as is like this internal drive. You know, you probably walk down the street and you have gears running in your mind that the average person doesn't. You know, you have ideas and thoughts and hey, we could do this, or we could do this, or I need to try this, or, you know, and the average person walking beside you is going, I got to pick up my laundry on the way home, you know, or my dry cleaning on the way home. And, you know, your gears are always spinning. And I would love for a couple of those to spin out some ideas here as we close this idea of
absolutely.
What are one or two things that you think would be really helpful to people that are kind of sitting in that cube thinking, I need to bust out of here, or they're just getting started with something that really just ideas that are industry, you know, that are not industry specific, like just leading well, founding a company well, starting a brand well. You know, what are one or two things that really stand out to you?
Yeah. So I think that if you're just getting started, I like to do this exercise myself, where if you imagine that, you know, money was not a concern, let's say someone miraculously gifted you like, I don't know, $100 million, right? So you're no longer working for money. What mission or purpose do you want to serve? And so that's kind of the first part of it. And then the second part of it is skill sets. So I always like to tell entrepreneurs to look at their previous experiences, because everybody has a ton of experiences that are unique to them only. And that's where the, you know, real golden nuggets of wisdom lie. And you may be thinking to yourself, like, I haven't done anything with my life. Like, you know, like, but that's actually not true, because everybody has a unique story that they can tell. And it's all about storytelling. And so if you combine like the piece where you want to really serve and make an impact, you know, not having money as a concern, and then the other piece with like the skill sets and the experience that you had, and you marry those two together, I mean, you can get some really interesting ideas on, you know, what industry you want to be in, you know, what skill sets. And I'll just give you a couple of examples, because maybe that's a little bit too high level for listeners. And so let's say you're, you know, a huge wine lover, right? You love drinking wine, discovering new, you know, wineries and vintages and whatnot. And you're really good at, let's say, creating videos or storytelling. So you're combining the industry, like a winery or, you know, just generally wines, with your skill set of storytelling with video, combining those, and maybe you go out to different wineries and you do a whole like review or whatever. But you're marrying those two, like you have the industry and then you have your skill set that you've built, and kind of like putting those together to create something. And I always urge people to have something that you start from passion and purpose, because you won't go anywhere if you're just trying to do it for either money or fame. Like those are probably the worst reasons to start something. And honestly, like people like to say like they really want to be an entrepreneur because it's cool. It's like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, and it sounds sexy and people will look at you with respect. But trust me, being an entrepreneur is the least sexy thing that you can do.
I love
like
it.
You are literally at the bottom of the totem pole, and you have your customers are your bosses, and you have to serve your customers.
That's right.
And honestly, like the moment you quiet your ego and serve others, that's when the flip will switch. And a lot of entrepreneurs think from the opposite way, where like, oh, I'm the cool entrepreneur, like, you know, you got to respect me, like I'm this person. But actually, the moment you quiet that ego and you think beyond yourself, like now for me, like I'm trying to empower my team. Like I no longer, I want them to have a good life. I want them to be able to, go out and achieve their dreams. And when I look at it that way, instead of me being like, all right, I'm their boss, this is what you need to do. You're all working hard for me because I want to buy that car or buy that house. Like that approach is not going to work. You have to flip it. And once you serve others, that's when all the magic happens. So
it seems like like what you described, I've seen it like the ikigai, kind of diagram, where passion and what the world needs and what you're good at and what you'll get paid for, where's that intersection of all those, concepts. And I love the way you kind of frame that. And it's interesting. I mean, I've done this for, 5 years or so, and there's been so many different ideas and perspectives and opinions about whether passion is important or not. There are people in here that get on there that go, no, it doesn't matter if you're selling widgets or you're selling, potholes in the road. It's just a matter. It's the game. That's the game of selling. But I tend to agree with you. I think on those most difficult days when you just don't feel like getting out of bed, if you care about what you're doing, I think it's that extra little boost of energy that you need to kind of get over that hump type thing. And I think it also affects longevity. How long will you be engaged in the pursuit? You mentioned earlier patience and, just character and the things that you need to do well. But I mean, I love the way you frame that and just kind of wrap this up really well with that, with those two, really good insights. And is there anything else that we just haven't touched on you just want to wrap us up with today, and maybe just tell people what's the best way to kind of follow up with you?
Yeah. So I'm pretty active on Twitter. So you can find me at Yong-Soo Chung. It's YONGSOOCHUNG. And then if you want to check out my podcast, you can go to firstclassfounders.com.
All right, firstclassfounders.com. And so how long have you been doing your podcast?
Launched in November, actually.
And it's just you, kind of a monologue.
Yeah, they're mostly solo episodes. I'm starting to experiment with different formats, but I think
everybody does.
I mean, I think you have to, right? I mean, you kind of have to try different things and see what happens.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it, man.
I'm having a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it would be gold to just be able to kind of pick your brain just week after week or every couple of weeks or whatever. So yeah, I'm anxious to give it a listen. But man, thanks again for just taking time today. And I know you got a busy schedule because I mean, rarely do we have people on here that are trying to run like 3 things at one time. So I know your time is valuable, but just really appreciate you just sharing your story and sharing your insights and really just playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Man, thanks again. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you having me on the show. Thank you.
We hope you heard some great takeaways. Make sure you follow up with our guests today and show them the support they deserve. As always, thank you for listening and playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide.